And a very good morning to everyone. Happy Monday. And thank you for joining us for America Through the Eyes of in the Zoom meeting room. I am Elisa Malice, the chairman of the American Chamber in Singapore. And this is the first time I am hosting America Through the Eyes of. And in fact, we have quite a special edition here. As we saw the results of the US election, we decided that it is time to put some more focus on the economic lens, and we have brought in a couple of economists. Some of you may have joined the last session with Timur from DBS, and we're really looking at America through the eyes of economists and all this geopolitical uncertainty. And I want to welcome and thank Selena Ling for being with us this morning.
Good morning, Eliza, and welcome everyone.
Thank you so much. So, Selena, you're the Chief Economist and Head of Global Markets Research and Strategy at OCBC, but you've also been at OCBC for 25 years in a variety of roles, including the Head of Treasury Research and Strategy. And prior to that, also had quite a bit of experience in the government, Assistant Director, Economics Division at the Ministry of Trade and Industry for 4 years, and spent some time outside of Singapore as well, in the UK at the London School of Economics. And so I think, you're bringing a lot of important perspectives. We're very grateful to have you join us here today. And I did see that, most recently you've been involved in a number of events. We're going to be spending the first 30 minutes hearing from you, and then we will open it up to our audience. So please have your questions ready. You can also put them in the chat at any time. We're going to spend the second half of the session really in a dialogue here with Selena. But first of all, Selena, you've been featured in Business Times in different events recently. And I saw one of the headlines that I really found thought-provoking here is, how will a Trump 2.0 play out for Asia and specifically for Singapore? Maybe we can start there.
Okay, great. Thank you, Eliza. So it's an interesting time of the year to be talking about Trump 2.0 because we're counting down to 20th of January when Trump will actually take office. And even before that, market has been very fascinated with the appointments that he will make, in particular some of the candidates for some of the key posts. And I think there is a lot of anticipation about, the tariffs, the immigration policies, the tax cuts, and also some of the deregulation of selected industries. So some good, some bad, I think, in terms of the impact on this part of the world. I think the one that, of course, financial markets are trying to wrap their head around is the 60% tariffs on China and also 10 to 20% tariffs on the rest of the world, which of course will include this part of the world. Right. So given that Asia, particularly ASEAN, are fairly trade dependent and also very plugged into the manufacturing supply chains, so there is some anticipation about how that's going to change the overall dynamics for the global supply chain, but also how it's going to also weigh potentially on China's growth. And in turn, because China is a very big trading and investment partner for this region as well, so there could be second round effects. And I think generally the uncertainties are really what's trying to kind of like temper a little bit the risk sentiments going out into 2025. So some key things, maybe I'll just highlight quickly. One is that in our 2025 Global Outlook report that we published in late November, essentially we are still looking for a fairly soft landing for the US. So in terms of the overall growth story, we don't expect recession on the horizon for any time in the next 3 to 6 months. Of course, there is a fair bit of unpredictability due to the policy shifts that Trump may bring about when he takes office. But essentially, we do think the Fed will continue to cut rates from here. In fact, this week, we are anticipating 25 basis point cut. And although markets kind of like hesitating about whether the Fed will continue to cut rates in January itself, we think that they are likely to follow through at least with January and March until they have a clearer picture of what some of the Trump 2.0 policies would mean for inflation. The other point really is on ASEAN itself, because both the US and China are very important trading partners, particularly for certain countries like Vietnam, for instance. nearly 30% of their exports go to the US. So if Vietnam actually sees 10 to 20% tariffs from the US, there may be a significant impact on their baseline growth forecast for 2025. Okay, so the key question here really is in terms of the timing of the tariffs and also the actual magnitudes of the tariffs that will be put in place. Because what people are trying to grapple with is really that, is it just an opening salvo paving the way for US-China negotiations on the trade front? And is Trump really serious about trying to put tariffs on the rest of the world? Because that would be quite uh, punitive. I mean, no one has actually done universal tariffs before. Yeah. So that's really the food for thought that we have as we stand at the end of 2024 and looking ahead into 2025.
Thank you, Selena. So, yeah, I mean, when we think specifically about Singapore, it's really mixed, and I saw in one of the articles the win-lose conundrum. Singapore especially could be the beneficiary of some supply chain shifts that come as a result of tariffs. And then, of course, tariffs can hurt demand. So you described very well how unpredictable the situation is. At the same time, if you were expecting, as all this shakes out, Singapore to benefit, win or lose, or be somewhere in the middle, what are you expecting even amid the uncertainty?
Well, the Singapore economy so far has outperformed most of market expectations in 2024, as you can see from the third quarter growth forecast. The manufacturing rebound, mainly on the back of the electronics demand picking up a little bit, that has actually hugely benefited the Singapore economy. So instead of flying mostly on the services and the construction arm, we're starting to see some green shoots in the manufacturing front. And that's the main reason why for the full year of 2024, we're expecting the Singapore economy could probably grow around 3.5%, 3.6%. That is higher than the initial growth forecast of 1 to 3% and then 2 to 3%. And then now the government has also upgraded it to around 3.5% as well. So the question is, of course, this higher base may mean that 2025 could become more challenging. The external environment is one big headwind, I would say. It's not just the tariff uncertainty, but really what's happening with the geopolitical landscape as well. We did see not only the Russia-Ukraine war and also the Middle East conflict persisting, but of course, more recently, we saw, recent developments in South Korea, for instance, in France, and then there's a snap election coming up in Germany as well. So things look a little bit unsettled at this moment. And then the big question, of course, the silver lining that the financial markets was really banking on was the start of the global monetary policy easing cycle. But that now seems to be a little bit of a rethink about how much the Fed can cut if some of the tariffs and the deportation strategies actually turn out to fuel inflation again in the US. So for Singapore, I think looking out into 2025, we still have a baseline growth scenario of around 2 to 3%. Growth, I would say, will be a little bit more even and broad-based. Services side may slow down a little bit, mainly because the labor market should cool, and the cooling will be gradual. It will be more because businesses will be a little bit more cautious at the start of the year, given some of the external uncertainties that I've been talking about. But I think also, on the domestic front, there are a couple of challenges that we do expect would be, addressed in the upcoming budget. This, of course, for households and individuals would really still be the high cost of living and basically the cooling in the job market. But I think from the businesses front, the high cost of doing business, the availability and basically the difficulty of getting foreign manpower and skilled talent remains. And I think in this very polarized world where there's a lot of recalibration of supply chain, how should businesses position themselves in a world where US tensions continue to persist? I think these are kind of like all these swirling headwinds that surround Singapore at this moment. And also to bear in mind, I think it is very likely that we will see the general elections having to take place next year as well. So, there are a lot of things to look out for in 2025.
Yeah, that's for sure. And as we focus in a little more on Singapore, you're speaking about some of the layoffs, and the fresh graduates are finding it tough in the job market. How do you see, with all of this uncertainty, how do you see it playing out for them? And what does that do to the broader picture when we have our fresh graduates finding it more difficult?
I mean, to be fair and to set things in context, it's not that Singapore's labor market is under stress by any circumstances. The
Hmm.
overall unemployment rate is still very low. You're talking about 2% or around there. And retrenchment levels actually have been very, very restrained. I think what we have here is that the Singapore labor market remains tight. Um, it's just that, after the last few years post-pandemic, when there was a huge, musical chairs happening because people were paying up to get the skilled talent, and the availability of foreign talent was a little bit more constrained. Hence, we did see outsized wage growth, basically taking place in the last few years. So that's starting to taper off. And I think given the external outlook looking a little bit more cloudy, most of the organizations that I talk to have turned a little bit more cautious in terms of their hiring intentions.
Hmm.
It's not that they really are like, retrenching people. I think apart from some of the cases that we see in the news about some of the big tech companies, but most of the, other industries have been very, very restrained. Retrenchment levels are actually quite well controlled. It's just that the hiring intentions have come off. And in terms of the wage growth, they're also growing a little bit more cautious. So financial institutions, for instance, typically tend to be like kind of like the canaries in the coal mine. They are usually quite sensitized to, the risk sentiments. And that means that, if most of the financial institutions have turned a little bit more cautious in terms of fresh hiring, that would actually impact, for example, like you said, the fresh graduate situation. So talking to some of the interns that we have in the organization as well, those who are actually graduating, first half of next year, they do say that it is quite challenging to land permanent roles because most organizations have kind of like taken a little bit of a cautious stance in terms of fresh hiring. So either they are just maintaining their staffing levels, or they basically putting people on contract, for instance, until they get clarity on what is going to happen on the tariff and also on the China situation.
Yeah, so a bit of caution, yet overall, we have a stable and optimistic picture. In fact, our AmCham manpower study that we just completed in the last couple of months also shows us, at least for the AmCham member companies, that hiring is planned to continue at the same rate as last year and quite a healthy pace. So I think that is certainly good news as well. If we broaden now and look a little bit more regionally, I think you talked about relationship and a different volatility going on geopolitically for a number of countries. What about, let's focus a little bit on China. And I know you were also on the Asia Futures 2024 Asia Future Summit panel. And U.S.-China relations were discussed quite a bit in the Trump 2.0 era. Also, we see that Trump did invite Xi Jinping to his inauguration, and a delegation will be sent. And so, every day, every week, we have developments. How do you see the U.S.-China relation impacting overall and here for us in the region?
Well, I think, this time around is not Trump's first term in office. So the Chinese policymakers probably have a better handle on what Trump may mean, both in terms of trade policy and others. That said, it doesn't mean that Trump is going to be any more less unpredictable. So I think there is a fair bit of familiarity, yet caution. I think the levels of trade tariffs that Trump is talking about, 60%, is a lot more punitive compared to the Trump 1.0. And I think this time round, the sense is that because it's probably going to be his last term in office, He will want to do whatever he can to make America great again, even if it comes at a cost to global trade or potentially even to the US economy. So I think there is a fair bit of anticipation, but also trepidation. I think it's good that the top leadership are starting to talk to each other. Okay. It doesn't really necessarily mean that you're going to get a quick resolution on the trade front or any of the competition, especially in terms of the advanced manufacturing and the chips front. In fact, if you want to do a little bit of holiday reading over this Christmas and you want to do some bedtime reading, there's this latest book by Robert Lighthizer that was published last year
Okay.
about the title says no trade is fair. Okay, so
Mm,
it's really about sorry, no trade is free. So he's not a believer in free trade, he's a believer in fair trade. And fair trade from whose perspective? It is from the US perspective. So I think China, really has a bit of a challenging time ahead, not
mm,
just because of some of these trade tariffs that will come into play, but really also because it has a lot of domestic challenges at this point in time, right? Growth is slowing down. They have to continually pump stimulus in order to try to achieve their growth target of around 5%. They have done a lot on both the fiscal and monetary policy side to basically, try and put a floor to the property slump, to try and stabilize, the animal spirits among the Chinese consumers. There's this big lying flat phenomenon or tangping, as what they say, where, if the youth don't see much hope and then they just kind of like take it easy, that's not good from the dynamism of the Chinese economy. And of course, as and when they have some of these regulatory crackdowns on specific industries, on specific businesses, that also kind of like, drives a little bit of that fear into some of the business community. And I kind of think that, basically the Chinese policymakers really do have their hands full. They're trying to support the property market, support the equity market, support the wealth of the Chinese households. At the same time, they are trying to, fund the local governments because land sales is now basically on the decline, and they're trying to do all these things. So, there's this saying that, I talked about, I think probably many, many years ago. In Chinese, they say, 10个锅九个盖. Basically, imagine you're a chef, you're cooking 10 pots at the same time, but you only have 9 covers. So you just keep shuffling the covers from one pot to another in order to try and prevent the pot from boiling over. So
mm.
that's quite a apt, description of basically what the Chinese policymakers are basically doing. They have a lot of challenges on their plate right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And that sense of sort of intensity and shuffling around as we were getting ready for the session, I think, we were reflecting, it's been a very intense year, 2024. And you mentioned, it doesn't stop. And I think rightly so, at this time of year, for us to see this kind of geopolitical uncertainty in South Korea, in France, in Germany, many things coming up in 2025. What are you anticipating it's going to look like for businesses as we start the new year?
Well, I think businesses have been through a fairly challenging period of time in the last 4 or 5 years as well. First with the pandemic, and then of course with all the wars that we are seeing, and increasingly, a global landscape that tends to be very polarized. I think this recalibration of the global supply chains will likely continue. Okay, so there's two ways this can play out. I was reading this very interesting McKinsey study about geopolitical reconfigurations. So they tried to measure geopolitical distances of the trade that's happening, and they actually found that since 2017, for some of the major trading countries, UK, Germany, US, and China, for instance, geopolitical distances have been shrinking, meaning that they tend to trade with people that are closer to them, whether in terms of political alliances or in terms of physical distances. So this means that this onshoring or nearshoring phenomenon is actually happening, and I think will probably continue to persist. So for businesses, it's not just about just in time or just in case kind of production. One of the key characteristics that you will have to watch out for in this kind of environment where there is a lot of geopolitical considerations is that you would have also to consider, where the geopolitical shifts are and how do you manage some of those shifts. I mean, one outcome of this really was the China plus one or the China plus N phenomenon, where for a lot of multinationals that used to use China as the factory of the world, that has evolved quite a fair bit. Most of them would have a plus one or plus N outside, typically in Southeast Asia. But but if you bear in mind that Trump may want to do 10 to 20% tariffs on the rest of the world, is precisely to plug this loophole of Chinese proxy production centers, right? So that's why a lot of people are looking at Vietnam and also possibly some of the other countries that could be potential targets of some of the terrorist situations. So it's not to say that everything is doom and gloom. I think there is still a lot going for the world. Some of the structural shifts that we see in terms of tackling climate change, in terms of green finance, and also in terms of the whole embracing the AI boom, I think that would be some of the growth drivers that we see that will drive global growth in the next 3, 5, 10 years ahead. And of course, for ASEAN itself, this whole push towards greater regional cooperation is also likely, one source of stability in a very uncertain world.
Thank you. And I encourage, we have a couple questions coming in, which we'll get to in a moment, and encourage those of you who haven't to type in your questions, so we will be able to incorporate them coming up. As we get ready for our questions, Selena, what is your advice to businesses as they get ready? AmCham member businesses, multinational businesses here in Singapore for 2025?
Well, I think in an environment where there is elevated noise levels, it really comes down to some, I would say, pretty basic stuff. You have to be quite nimble and agile. You have to continually read the tea leaves for the winds of change. You don't take it for granted that specific industries or countries that may be currently favored or in a growth phase may not suddenly pivot and turn slightly colder in the short term due to policy shifts. I think it really does mean that, at least from a corporate point of view, shoring up your balance sheet, making sure you have ample cash reserves, trying to diversify both your markets and also your supply chains, having, basically resources that you can call upon if a crisis does hit, not being overly reliant on a particular market or a particular supplier. I think all this will make lots of economic sense in an uncertain world like this.
Thank you for the wonderful suggestions. So I'm going to just take a couple of our questions here and encourage everyone to continue putting in more questions. So first one from Roy Ong. If you have a chance to speak to the leaders in Singapore, what would you say to cushion the impact of Trump 2.0? The Trump team is very transactional, of course, deal making, and right now trade figures favor US. What should Singapore do to build confidence with the United States as a reliable friend, with both sides having interest and making sure of both sides? So what should the United States, so what should Singapore be doing? What would you be advising the government to be doing to build confidence with the United States as a reliable friend, I think is the key question.
Okay.
Sorry, Elisa, I just wanted to cut in. So we actually saved the question portion for when we're offline. I just wanted to share that we've got a couple of minutes left and we do a rapid fire before we close off LinkedIn Live. If you don't mind, I'm happy to do the rapid fire and then we can close in the LinkedIn Live session. Then we can have a much more frank, I think, open discussion with Selena.
All right. Okay. Yeah, sure. Let's go ahead and do that.
Sure. So Selena, we always close out the live session the same way. So Shen has 3 questions for you. She just asked that you don't overthink it too much. Answer with
Okay.
your heart. So the
Okay.
first question is your favorite American food.
The hamburger.
Great choice. Great
With
choice.
cheese
Do you
or
have a
without?
favorite?
No, is the
Oh
question.
yes, lots of cheese and onions and mushrooms. Less on the fries, but okay.
Good choice. Good choice. Second question, favorite American place.
Oh, Boston. I went to Boston just quite recently last year. I really enjoyed my time there. It's a beautiful place.
Also a great question. And then the last one, favorite American person.
Wow. I can't say he's my favorite American person, but it's gotten to the stage where I talk so much about Trump, I start dreaming about him at night sometimes.
Uh-oh.
You can still answer that way. Totally a legit question and answer. Well, thank you so much, Selena, for that great LinkedIn live session. My colleague Stella is just going to turn it off, and then I'll let you know. And then Elisa, I'll pass it back to you, and you can kickstart the question portion.